Welcome to Show Studio. It's our first panel of London Fashion Week, and it's a very special panel because we're actually streaming live from the Old Selfridges Hotel as part of the ICA's A Journey Through London Subculture exhibition. London Fashion Week is obviously a brilliant thing to be talking about when you're thinking about subculture. We're also talking about a brilliant designer. We're talking about J.W. Anderson, who, as many of you know, I'm sure, and as many of our panelists will dissect, takes a lot of his inspiration from what's going on in, and what has gone on in subculture. I have a suitably diverse and also perhaps slightly insolent panel with me, but I'll let them introduce themselves, starting with the wonderful Brix.
My name is Brix Smith-Start, and I'm a fashion TV presenter, a retailer, and a musician.
My name is Katie Barron. I'm an author and a journalist. I wrote a book called Stylists, New Fashion Visionaries, and I work for a company that's called Stylist.com, that's a creative intelligence agency.
My name is Soki. I'm a creative director and freelance fashion stylist.
I'm Bel Jacobs. I'm a writer and I used to edit fashion for Metro newspaper.
I'm Hettie. I'm a writer and editor, and I specialise in fashion, art and design.
Now, before we start talking about Jonathan Anderson, I'd like to spend a little bit of time focusing on the theme of this amazing exhibition, which is obviously subculture. When people talk about what makes London Fashion Week so exciting, they often talk about that subversiveness and that diversity. So I'd like to focus a little bit on whether you think that London's sort of rich history of taking fashion inspiration from youth culture and subculture is what's made London Fashion Week so great. I'll go to Hettie at the end because Brix complains that I always go to her first. So Hettie, tell us a little bit about maybe the historical perspective of that.
I think what's quite interesting looking at that show in the other room is that it's a reminder of the way that the rest of the world used to see British fashion, which is all to do with the kind of pop culture, youth, slightly kind of antagonistic angle, kind of in-your-face stuff. We were here for the opening night the other day, and people were really going for it, and there were men lavishing jewellery all over themselves, wearing tights and high heels, and it was really that very out there aspect of London, and that's really how British fashion used to be seen. It was the formal Savile Row suit, and then there was this kind of naughty side. And the flip edge of that is that people didn't necessarily take British fashion that seriously. I think probably until like 7 years ago, potentially. So that there were big people like, there were big people, but they would not show in London. They wouldn't be part of London Fashion Week. And one of the big successes of the last few years is to lure big names back here, big serious shows. And so oddly, it's kind of strange to be reminded of that kind of previous reputation that British fashion had.
Bel, did you notice that a lot over the course of your career working somewhere like Metro, that point where London fashion began to be seen as something that was actually sort of had to be taken seriously? It was somewhere where all the international editors did come.
Yeah, I definitely saw that. There is an argument, I think, that it happened a little bit earlier. If you go to the V&A exhibition, From Club to Catwalk, they talk about how in the 1980s the international world was starting to take more notice of British fashion then, but definitely within the last few years, yeah. Absolutely.
So I was just going to say, I think there's definitely something in that idea that there's actually the idea of something being alternative is becoming a bigger commodity in a way. I think, for a long time we've seen fashion kind of become more, especially when you look at the New York catwalks, become more commercial. And all of a sudden now, especially people like J.W. Anderson have arrived and they've become more polished in a way. It's kind of shown that actually there's something out there that can be different, that can be subversive, but it can also kind of sell and be construed at the sort of highest level of fashion as well.
Yeah.
I definitely think before it used to almost be either it was the kind of the super finesse or it was alternative, and they were on two sides. There was a sort of line in the sand between them. And now actually there's a sort of a dissipation of that line. And yeah, alternative can be a strong, valuable commodity.
Would you agree with that, Soki? Because you obviously style for magazines like ID, kind of youth magazines that could be seen when they started were zines. They were alternative magazines. Have you noticed that sort of commodification of the alternative?
I think of my generation, they're quite ignorant as to what has already been done. Everyone seems to, at this day and age, think this is just who we are, this is what's happening. So I'll be honest, I don't think too much about that at the moment. So,
what do you think the appeal of young designers like J.W. Anderson has been, the ones that are doing something that is very sort of subversive, you could say, especially if you look at his men's? Why is that? How can that become a sellable brand then?
That's a hard question, but I think it just goes with the tide. I think a lot with new designers like J.W. Anderson, it's almost like a trend. It's kind of right at the moment. You know, we had the medium cut-off, we had the over-the-top designers, and at the moment it's all quite minimal, and that's obviously what's flowing just now. I mean, I don't work a lot with designers like J.W. Anderson at the moment, but I mean, I completely get where you're coming from.
Brix, I want to go to you because you obviously really bring together fashion and music, as we were talking about before, because Brix was in the fall. So tell me a bit about how you think sort of subculture, music culture has influenced fashion, and do you see that when you look at the work of someone like Jonathan Anderson?
Not specifically with Jonathan Anderson do I see it, but I do see it with a lot of things like Sibling, and I certainly see it with stuff Lulu Kennedy's doing, and I mean, I see threads of it coming through. What's really, I mean, back in the day when I was in the fall, you know, I was dressed head to toe in Body Map, and of course Body Map's in there. And I can see, and the Club to Catwalk thing at the V&A brought all of that kind of stuff back to the forefront. And yes, it was super unpolished in the day, but what it was divine inspiration, and actually people could be really free to be creative without being super criticized. It wasn't under a microscope. And I think in those conditions, the creativity germinated, and now you see the seeds that were planted back then coming through with people like JW and loads of others. Pretty much, you know, I think it's great in Britain because you can really be free to be who you are. You know, okay, it is less polished. It's still less polished, but
do you think it is still less polished?
I mean, I think it's moving towards that. I mean, you think like Christopher Kane, you know, fantastic. Erdem, of course, is not really British, but anyway. And JW, I think, I mean, people are saying to me that he's the golden child, that he has a conceptual brain and a commercial brain, and that he is really the future, and he has this huge notion of a brand, and he knew how to build a brand from when he came out of the womb, you know. So I think, you know, it's all coming up now. It's all coming up. It's taken a while, but you know, the seeds are in there.
Katie, what do you think of the success of J.W. Anderson? Is it his ability to build a brand?
Yeah, I think this, you know, Brix talking about brand making is really, really interesting, and I think one of the ways he's almost doing that is the way he's kind of separating himself out from the rest. Is that actually if you look at what he doesn't really appear to look left and right. I mean, I don't know, obviously, I'm not quite sure what we're going to see today, but it's probably something that isn't going to kind of, you know, when you see all the magazines doing their big trend stories, it probably won't fit into those trend stories. And it kind of reminds me, you know, that there was a couple of stylists in my book that said that they specifically, for instance, didn't go to any fashion shows, apart from maybe a couple of the Japanese designers, because they didn't believe in looking left and right. And when I look at J.W. Anderson's the last few seasons worth of shows, I certainly get that sense of something that actually, I don't see necessarily a lot of subcultural references. I see something that's just a lot more conceptual and a lot more cerebral. So in a way, I almost see it a bit more like looking at a Chalayan show or maybe even a Dries Van Noten or something like that. So I think it's about that kind of not looking left and right. I think it's why he's even quite enigmatic when he talks after the shows, and he doesn't really say that much about where his inspiration came from. I think he deliberately likes to be quite vague, you know, to evade that sort of questioning for that reason. But
I mean, it is interesting because you see this development in what's happened with his work, because in fact in the earliest shows you really did see a very direct influence from punk and from subculture movements. And I remember I interviewed him at about that time, I think it was in about 2011, and he'd just done that Paisley collection, and it was with you know, the skirts that looked like sweaters that were knotted around your waist and this kind of thing. And he just had this very kind of energetic quality, and he just said, as soon as I make a collection, I hate it and I need to move on to the next thing. I can't even look at it. And what I think is quite interesting is that almost from that point, he clearly has actually started reconsidering what he's doing in each collection. You suddenly see it being, you know, each collection, whether it's a kind of pre-fall or a resort or the men's or the women's, seems to be an evolution suddenly. Yeah. Whereas before he was really kind of chopping and changing and going from, you know, suddenly it was some kind of, you know, perfect 1960s American housewife, suddenly it was punk and messing about with stuff. And he's now really, it seems like he's on a bit of a path.
Maybe it's kind of that graduating from being a sort of student of fashion in a way, when all of a sudden you've got all these ideas that you want to kind of, every show you do is creating a set of characters that your sort of fantasy set. And then when you kind of, you sort of nurture that a bit further, then it becomes a lineage of these characters a little bit. I don't know.
It's like trying different haircuts and hair colors and finding that, one that suits you in the end, but at least trying it all out. It's good.
But he's done that incredibly quickly, hasn't he?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm interested because he has done it incredibly quickly.
Yeah.
How has he managed to do that so quickly, do you think?
I honestly don't know. As part of the research for this, I looked at some of his early shows, like the earliest menswear shows, and they were incredibly commercial, very, very lively, very appealing, sexy boys, a lot of references to heritage as well as sort of a global traveller look. And he's really pared that down, and I kept trying to look at the connections between then and now, and I can see some similarities, but he's really found quite a vision for himself that he's sticking to, and he's not afraid to play with it throughout. I mean, you can almost always recognise a J.W. Anderson shape now, or an outfit. It's an amazing process, really.
He worked at Prada. He worked as a window dresser at Prada. Do you think that there is something? He doesn't like it when people say this, but do you think there's something of the Prada spirit in what he does, perhaps?
I know that he credits his time there with informing him on sort of knowing how to sell. That's pretty much all I
Maybe also this sort of sense of rigour, because I know that stylists that have worked with Prada before have said that it's kind of like fashion boot camp in a way, that what we'll finally see on the catwalk has been through so many different guises, and it's been sort of beaten out in so many different ways that it's the most rigorous process you ever go through. And I think perhaps intellectually looking at his work, that maybe that's got some sort of bearing on it. I don't know.
And also, didn't you work with Manuela Pavesi? And when I looked at some of her pictures, there was sort of still that play of androgyny, but I wonder if that had an impact on him as well, because I know he looked up to her a lot.
I'm glad you mentioned androgyny, because obviously with J.W. Anderson, if you've seen the men's shows, with those, he does a lot of kind of very short stuff that looks like it should be women's wear. Those frilly shorts he did, the sort of cropped bandeau tops he did. I'm interested by something that I think it was actually Charlie Porter, who's here. What he wrote on his blog, that kind of gender was the thing that our generation, it was the last to be, that we have no regard for traditional gender norms, and that's what this generation of designers is gonna play with. Would you agree with that? Do you think that's what makes him seem radical and seem like he's so at the forefront of London fashion? The fact that he is playing with gender so obviously and so provocatively.
I think that's something that's in general happening at the moment, that there are these shops like LNCC that are trying to sell their collections both to men and to women, and there seems to be this spirit coming through at the moment that it's all interchangeable and that you can pick up pieces from each collection. So I'm not necessarily sure whether he's the person pushing that. I mean, there are people like Rad Hirani that do fully androgynous collections for men and women, and I think there are people that are doing it maybe in a more political fashion. I think his is, in fact, that somebody like Stefan Schneider's been doing it for nearly 20 years now, I think.
So does Johnson do it to shock, do you think?
I don't think he does it to shock. I think it's a genuine ethos, and that he's loving the feminine and the male, the masculine and the female, the points where they meld between them. I was just going to say, when you were talking about he's got to this point so fast. In fact, what I've been really interested in watching in these last few collections is that I almost feel that he's taking things that he wants to experiment with formally. And so it seems like the last 4 collections have almost been a study in architecture and geometry, and he's looking at how far he can take this kind of column shape and reducing the kind of human shape to its basic components. And what I'm really interested to see is, there are obviously things that he hasn't really attempted yet. So for example, properly draped frocks. I've never seen him do something like that. He's doing a lot of kind of draped trousers and long skirts and this kind of thing. So I almost feel that he's going to just keep moving through these various different areas until he's really kind of perfected it. It seems like he gets kind of fascinations with things and wants to keep playing with them and keep playing with them.
What does what he's done so far and the success of what he's done say about the way that women want to dress? Maybe that's quite a good question for you, Soki, actually. What does it say about the way?
Well, I think, I'll be honest, at the start, a lot of his collections were quite androgynous for me, and like a lot of the work that I do has got quite a sexual reference to it. But now, I think that you can clearly see, obviously, the previous collections is a lot more, it's quite obvious what he's trying to portray, and I think it's obviously opening up to a better audience, because you have to remember that I'm kind of bridging the gap between the people that know, like all of us that know exactly what we're talking about, or the young girls that will look at this collection and not understand it. And obviously now, because I'm shooting for editorials for publications, you kind of understand it a lot more. You're kind of seeing how it's made, like how the fabric sits, everything, like how it shapes the body. So I think, I personally think that he's succeeding in shaping the woman's body.
Do you think the Topshop range he did was quite a turning point for him? Because I feel that got the androgyny and the kind of subversiveness of what he likes to do out there to an audience who will now perhaps look at his collections and identify a bit more with it. Maybe it's because they've worn one of the mini kilts, so they see a longer version or a slightly different version, but they identify with it.
Well, yeah, I think that a lot of people have, again, the younger generation, that's obviously opened their eyes to this. I don't think anyone would have kind of understood about anything about W. Anderson. I mean, that calibre of people, until the collection came out for Topshop. So it was kind of catered to a far younger group, and it kind of showed a bit more like a fun side to it. I think everything so far has been quite, just very classic, very elegant.
I think the fun thing's really, that's a really valid comment. I think particularly because if you look at it, the Topshop collection was great, but it was definitely like J.W. Anderson light, which is totally cool for that age range and also the price that you're going to pay for those clothes. So I think there's nothing wrong with that, and it totally shows his commercial brain. It didn't feel like it wasn't his work though, which is important. It still felt true enough to the brand, but it was a light.
What does his high fashion work say to you then about the way that women want to dress? Have we seen a complete death of wanting to look sexy in a traditional way? What does it say about the way women want to present themselves?
Well, I was just going to say what's really interesting now is he's doing Versus as well, which is so completely different. So it's really body conscious. It's very, very out there, kind of sexual, blingy, and I don't know whether that's going to then have some kind of influence on what he's doing, or whether he's really going to feel that it almost gives him the license to become incredibly, refined and androgynous in what he's doing in his main collection, because that kind of, more va-va-voom side is getting an outlet elsewhere. I don't know whether he has a va-va-voom side, but presumably Donatella's bringing it out in him somehow.
Yeah. Brix, what do you think it says about how women want to present themselves, how women want to dress? Because you've worked as a buyer, you have your own shop, you know what women want to look like. Why has he appealed to women?
God, I don't know. I don't know how to answer that. I just don't. In all honesty, I don't know. What I really want to do is see the collection now, and I'll answer it for you afterwards. Yeah.
Can we look at the collection? Are we ready to look at the collection? Yes.
Good.
Cool. No, not quite yet. Okay, let's keep talking a little bit about Jonathan.
Because I was going to say, actually, I do actually find a lot of his pieces quite appealing. And I think one of the things he does is he kind of changes. So a woman has an idea of how her silhouette should like, and he kind of breaks that apart and introduces new ideas of beauty, which I think you'd probably agree with, new ideas of considering what is beautiful. And I really enjoy that. I think you do have to be in a particular headspace to be willing to experiment with that and to go out looking. I mean, sometimes I dress in a way and you go someplace and you can see people going, what is she wearing? But actually, and I quite like that about him. I mean, I really like that about him. I think it makes him an intelligent designer and a daring designer.
How has he managed to become such a tour de force in London? Because what you say about these new ideas of beauty and something that challenges you and you see someone wearing it, I completely agree that's so appealing about his work, but it's almost similar to what someone like Simone Rocha or Medium Kircher were doing it, but how has J.W. Anderson become such a kind of tour de force? Is that his personality, his amazing focus on branding, his self-admitted giant ambition? What is it that's set him sort of racing in front of
his personality has a huge amount to do with it. I think also certain things in his career have been brilliantly timed. I think the Topshop collection came for him probably earlier than it would for other designers, and he grasped that and he presented something which was very commercial but also true to him, which was clever. There's something else I was going to say. There's something else that he did. The most controversial menswear collection that he did, I can't remember which season, was it 2012?
The ruffle one, the spring one,
was a massive talking point. It was kind of, even if it was unwearable for a lot of men, very uncommercial. I understand that the frilled shorts haven't actually sold that well.
They got sold to 3 stores.
Weirdly.
3 stores picked them up.
People were talking about it. It was in the Daily Mail. It was, and so it raised his profile in another way. and I think all of these things, the Topshop collection, the menswear collection, have worked really well for his career. And now and Versus, obviously. And now he is, he's really exciting.
Are we ready to see the collection now? One more minute. Okay.
But the other thing we were talking about when we were sitting on the giant sofa just over there is the fact that he's still a very young man. He's only 29, and at a very, very early point in his career, he went straight into doing 4 collections a year, which means that there's just simply a lot more of his stuff out there. And I also think that he doesn't just produce what you see on the catwalks. That I think that when I look in a mainstream magazine or a mainstream newspaper, you're seeing sweaters and knitwear and kind of quite wearable skirts that were never on the catwalk show. And so he's clearly very good at doing the catwalk as spectacle and producing these very dramatic things that are going to make it onto the front page of the paper. But then hidden among that are intensely wearable kind of t-shirts and trousers and things that...
In the showroom is like a vast commercial collection as well as the catwalk pieces, and I think he's had a lot of support, and I think people have championed him, and I think nurtured him, and I think that's really, really important, for young designers to, and he's been given a lot of freedom, and I think what he did with that menswear collection, when I first saw it, I'm going to have to say that I was horrified by it as a buyer. Because I see things in different ways sometimes, and I was like, oh my God, how can anyone that's just retarded? But what happened was, it's good that, because then when you think about it and you understand all the sort of like intermeshing of male and female and basically taking the sex out of it, I kind of wish that we were all a complete mixture of men and women. I wish there wasn't 2 sexes. I wish we would all be the same. I actually do. So I love what he's doing on that weird way. And now I understand it, and now I think it's brave. Now, not only do I think it's brave, but I think it's brilliant.
We've all mentioned that menswear collection. I did ask Hettie, was that just to shock? And I personally don't think it was just to shock, but we've all mentioned how helpful that was in getting his name out there. Belle, did you think that was to shock, that collection?
Yeah, I found it a very difficult collection. I found it very difficult to see men in that way. And I didn't want to ascribe motivation to it until I heard from him. And the way I heard from him was on Show Studio in your chat with him, and he was saying that he just had an idea. It wasn't to shock. If he really wanted to shock, he'd probably send men down the catwalk naked. But he was thinking about architecture, and I think it wasn't just a shock. No, I don't think that now. I think it was a very intellectual response to some of his concerns and interests. I do think it was slightly disingenuous to say if you send men out in frills, people aren't going to be talking about it, because the frills were all sorts of places and on the boots. But I think it was a powerful collection. Yeah, it really sticks in my head.
Should we have a look at what he's offering us for Spring/Summer 14 then for his women's wear? One thing that's interesting, given what you said, Hettie, I just want to touch on before we do dig in too much into the collection. You mentioned how he'll explore an idea for a few seasons, and he actually said that in an interview he gave to The Independent, I think it was today or maybe yesterday. He said that he uses Spring/Summer almost as a change point, a chance to explore something fresh. So I'm personally really excited to see what he does, because you get, even from that first look,
that's really interesting, because in fact I was saying he's never done full draping on it, and he's straight in doing something draped. So it's...
He's looking a bit at sort of folklore for this season, so he's doing something that's a little bit... Alex Fury, who's a fashionist with The Independent, did a studio visit, and he had all these Tudor folklore costumes out as his references.
Peasantry, I thought, was that another reference point?
Pardon?
He was looking at peasantry.
Peasantry, exactly, peasantry, yes. So what do we think of this first look? Katie, what's your thoughts? Were you expecting this?
Oh, well, it's kind of yes and no. I mean, it's kind of as unusual as I'd expected. The fact that, the initial thing that came into my head was sort of, folkloric Babydoll in a way. It's definitely a bit unsettling. And I think, it's interesting when talking about the menswear collection, that it was weird because it was almost unsettling because it was actually quite sexless in a way, and whether, this has kind of got the same thing. It's almost got some of the marks of kind of, sexy lingerie and that kind of, 60s Babydoll,
Well, he did talk about that in his menswear collection. He talked about thinking about sort of the British bedroom and perversions, and I think there is something... I think what he does is quite androgynous. I don't think he is a sexy designer, but I think he definitely thinks about sex, and I think you can see that. in what he's doing. Soki, what do you think? Is this a stylish dream?
Yeah, well, for me, like, was it spring summer 13, the resort collection, where he had the kind of blue and orange kind of ruffled drapes, and that for me was kind of what brought me back into interested in his collection. And obviously I've just seen a few of these images here, and for me that's obviously the sort of work that I do. But yeah, I think, well, I'd like to see more.
Should we see the next look? Do you want some water, Katie?
Show me your champagne.
Hettie, what do you think of this? You're looking very intrigued.
No, well, I like looking at the bigger pictures. I mean, there are two things that kind of I think are super interesting at the moment. The first one is I feel like on those first ones, when you're talking about the medieval thing, I felt like he was really going back to those silhouettes before people had closures, when things used to be just done with ribbons and pins, and really looking at a kind of minimal way of containing a body. So he literally just had those bands going down, which I thought was very interesting, where he'd been looking at that kind of very straight line before, and suddenly you've got all of these kind of curves and this volume coming out. He's obviously also getting really interested in creating structure by using pleats and tucks, and that was in the resort collection he's just done as well. There were quite a lot of sweaters that had little bits of kind of volume and negative space in them, and that's something that's really coming here. And the Sif fabrics are coming back as well.
I'm interested, you mentioned the kind of the technical side of his design. Because that's something, I think perhaps because his clothes are visually quite challenging, especially with that menswear collection. People talked a lot about the general, what you saw in that look, rather than the technical skill or the technical sort of ability that had gone into making that collection. Do you think that that side of his design often gets ignored, maybe because the looks are so...
I mean, it's funny, I think it's kind of gone into the background, because I remember right at the beginning, one of his big things was that he always wanted to do British manufacture, to use British heritage cloth. So he had this amazing kind of kid mohair suiting fabric, and he used all of these vintage silks that were made in the north of England, and he worked incredibly hard to try to make sure that everything was British produced. I think that in 2011 he said he'd only had one sweater made in China, everything else is British made. And that story seems to have kind of disappeared. I don't know whether he's still committing to that.
I think he moved on slightly from that purely through necessity.
You imagine so,
yeah.
But he can cut beautifully. He does. I mean, I was saying to Brix earlier, he can really do a beautifully cut suit jacket. So he's got real kind of technical ability underneath all of the showmanship as well.
Would you agree with that, Katie? Do you think there is a...
Yeah, I mean, I thought the last collection actually was incredibly sculptural, and I thought, you know, the way it moved down the catwalk, it felt like you were looking at a kind of the human embodiment of sculpture or something. So I actually, again, saw this sort of Chalayan-esque references. I actually felt like, you know, if you read afterwards, you know, the actual materials and the kind of various processes he'd gone through, seems like there's, again, that sort of rigour that he goes through to create something that's really quite extraordinary in that respect. Which I guess is why we haven't seen a lot of the kind of draping and the sort of the traditional, here's my evening wear, here's my sort of set of looks that will take you through every part of your life. At the moment it seems to be much more of a sort of preoccupation to use the materials in this way to, I mean, almost like someone that thinks a bit more like an architect in a way.
To me this feels more girlish than previous things we've seen. If only for the fact we've seen a lot of dresses, we've seen a lot of sheer...
It's much more youthful.
Yeah. Why do you think that feels... I wasn't expecting that from him, especially given what he did last season. Are we pleased to see this? What's our take so far? Brix, what do you think of it?
I think he's extremely clever, and that his clothes appeal to intelligent women in the same way that Margiela or Chalayan or to some extent Comme des Garçons would appeal to that kind of intellectual. But I can also see this, like Babydoll top in particular, I can imagine that with cut off denim shorts and a biker boot on a young girl. Do you know what I mean? I can see it working in lots of different ways. And I just, you know, stick by what I said before. He's extremely commercial and he's extremely intellectual at the same time, conceptual. And yes, it's more feminine that we've seen before. I love the fact that he was referencing Tudor stuff. Before there was a sheer crop top that was sheer, and then I think it had a leather skirt, so it had like the two different things. But over the crop top was a black square over her heart. And I just love that there were so many like layers to think about with what, I mean, it's so architectural. Look at that. Jesus, what's happening there? You know, someone help me out here. Someone from the crowd, what do you think's happening?
Well, he's been very interested in quite stiff leather for a while, so I guess he's now doing a kind of new like weaving with the leather. Or
See, this is really interesting, isn't it? Because it's almost got that slightly sort of grunge. Do you know what I mean? It's got it like tied around its waist, and yet it also looks a bit like, you know, there's a bit of a escapologist, bit of the Navy SEAL going on in there. You know, it's a whole bag of references.
Yeah.
But is that a return to the? Do you remember he did? We were talking about the sweaters, and that's like a front that's just like a sweater hanging off the neck and shoulders, and then the sleeves are coming off. So that weirdly is going back to kind of what he was doing 4 years ago. So it's a reference to his own earlier stuff.
Yeah, and also he does a lot of things with the waist, doesn't he? He's always wrapping things around it or having panels off it, or skirt trouser.
So the other thing that was interesting, it's not on the one we're looking at now, but the one that was the kind of Babydoll one. The other thing that kind of immediately struck me is there's something a little bit hospital-like about it. Tiny bit, you know, a bit of it's 60s Babydoll, and a bit of it actually almost feels like you can see the bits where he's looking at how you sort of constrict the body. Yeah. A bit like with the last one where it felt like, you know, a few people referred to it as, you know, the straitjacket-esque look that he put out. And so it feels like, it's about containing the body and, you know.
But you could look at it like energy bands going around the body. Do you know what I mean? Or you could look at it as a shower curtain, like, you know, holding a dead body. You know.
Yeah, there's that. There is that. There's definitely that.
I think that's what the appeal of J.W. Anderson is that you can look at the Babydoll thing and go, that's a bit nightwear, that's also a bit Austen, it's a bit folklore, it's a bit, there's so many references in there.
I know, I love it. It's for smart people.
And
you can make of it what you want, so you can be creative with the way you wear it and the way you interpret it. So it really lets you put your own personality onto what he's, you know, and your own onto what he's doing, and I love that. I love that.
I want to talk a little bit about his influence on fashion, which seems quite apt when we look at this collection, because as much as it feels quite of the moment, it feels, with that girlishness, it does feel very commercial. A couple of people have made comments about some of the stuff we saw in New York, particularly some of the shapes that Alex Wang and even at Victoria Beckham, that they seem to show the influence of that J.W. Anderson aesthetic. Do we think what he's doing, has he got to a point yet where he's influencing fashion, where he's showing, he's putting forward a new idea, or is that something that we'll get in a few seasons' time?
I mean, I think I've seen a constant role of influence. I mean, think of the number of people that are still doing pyjamas now. You know, he was doing those kind of paisley suits, 4 years ago? So, I mean, it just seems to be like a constant role that people are picking up when he's doing, and then he's switching and he's switching and he's switching.
But do you think people have also made criticisms of Jonathan for being derivative in what he does of other people? But to you guys, does this feel very fresh? Would you think that he does always?
What do you mean derivative? Taking influence?
Yeah, taking influences quite closely from what other people do.
Do you think that's a bad thing?
No, perhaps not. Do you think that's one of his strengths, being able to tap into things?
I think he targets very, like a few markets. As you were saying, he's very smart. When I think the collection has gone one way, and I'm kind of understanding it goes a completely opposite way. And I suppose like you're obviously catering to loads of different people, so it's very smart.
Yeah, there's different levels of intellectual, isn't there? It's
That's
like you said. I mean,
exactly right.
I think there's it's all for smart women, but some of it's a lot more accessible than others. So
And certainly broken up. There's easy pieces to wear there.
Yeah, no one's going to be disappointed in it.
I find it difficult to sort of, when you say is he derivative, aren't all designers absorbing everything all the time?
Yeah.
And it's how they feed it back to you that's that's interesting. He's interesting.
We mentioned that ruffled look from the menswear, and how can you not when you're talking about Jonathan? From this collection, we haven't seen the whole thing yet, so maybe this is a bit premature, but what do you think will be the takeaway look? Because Soki, you just said when you think it's going one way, it goes a different way. Is it going to be those kind of peasant baby doll looks, or is it going to be something like this, which is much more similar to what we saw last season? You know, I was expecting something much more like this. What's going to be the takeaway from this season?
I like that look. I like the Babydoll.
I think
two,
I think it'll be two things. I think in terms of the kind of the newsworthy brand chatter stuff, it'll probably be more the Babydoll. I think in terms of the buy, it will be the twisted fabrics, especially like the look that was like the all white look. It was almost a little bit sort of Halston-esque in a way. You know, looks like it's in some sort of amazing super ultra deluxe cashmere, or you know, beyond cashmere, whatever that would be.
You've mentioned Chalayan. What do we see his position as in fashion? Where can we see him going? What would we like to see him develop? Would you like to see him go to another house? Would you like to see him stay focusing on his own brand? Whose career would you like to see him sort of, not emulate, but mirror in his own work?
Isn't there a rumour that LVMH?
LVMH, yeah. There's a rumour that they're going to be investing. Would you be pleased with that?
Oh gosh, I honestly don't know. I worry a bit about J.W. Anderson because he's producing so much and he's working so hard. If I was his mom, I'd be worried about burnout.
Yeah.
So I don't know if having a massive house behind him would be beneficial. Might let him really spread his wings.
But the pressure and the corporate pressure, and then the squeezing of his creativity. You know, who knows how much they're going to torture him about what he's producing and confine his creativity.
Yeah, he's clever. Yeah, he's clever though. I think he had an offer earlier on which he actually turned down. I can't remember which group it was, and I think I remember him saying that it was too early for him at that stage. So he's smart.
He's sus.
Yeah.
I mean, 'cause what's quite interesting with that is that he doesn't really do accessories in a big way. And if you're doing a big house, the pressure is going to be on to do a lot of accessories because they're what? Yeah, smells a lot. I mean, I think he's only done a couple of bags. I mean, I don't know whether he did more did he do more for the Topshop collection?
Yeah, he did.
Yeah.
What about the shoes? Who does his shoes?
Hasn't he got a thing with Aldo? Don't they do? I think Aldo kind of sponsor his footwear, and he does.
He's done a few
little collections.
accessories that did kind of really take. You know, he did those men's boots on the runway that sort of were really embellished in colour, and they really took off. So I think it would be quite interesting to actually see him do accessories. I can imagine him doing really well. But, you know, he's done his little badges before and his little rings and that kind of thing. So, and we're seeing it's actually interesting we're talking about accessories because she seems to have a bag and with this look. So it would be interesting to see him sort of push that forward.
I think, you know, he's one of these people that was born knowing what they wanted to do their whole life and was guided to do it, and that it brings him such great joy, and he's so focused. And I think for people like him, they're living for what they're doing, and that I'm not that worried about him burning out, right? I mean, it depends on his lifestyle, but you know, if someone's really taking pleasure in getting up every day and creating and doing what they were born to do, they can only succeed. And he's a smart guy. You know, he's played his cards really, really well so far. And I'm excited for him. I'm excited to see the future.
Yeah, it's interesting you say someone who's always known what he wanted to do, because he actually trained as an actor before he moves into fashion. But I think in a way that might be his greatest asset, that he's got this amazing ability to perform and ability to put on this face. You know, he's amazing in interviews. He always gives you that perfect line that you can quote. And I sometimes think with him actually that, you mentioned this before, Bel, it's his personality that carries him in some ways.
But that's the thing, I think, you know, we were talking about the interviews he gives afterwards, not necessarily the full interviews, but just the post-show interviews. And he's very good at knowing what to withhold and when to withhold it. And I think you're right, I think it's about that performance to an extent. I think he really understands performance here as well. You kind of, even though there aren't any theatrics to this show, you still feel like you're seeing a performance of sorts.
Well, he knows about putting on costumes and becoming somebody else. And I think that kind of understanding of becoming someone else and changing it from what you're putting on, and that thing that you do get from being an actor, that just fed into what really he was meant to do. Do you know what I mean? He learned from that on many levels.
Can we just go back to that run of 3 looks with the sequin skirts? Because we were talking about kind of theatrics, and to me this is what he does really well. It's quiet theatrics, but a run of looks, and that's what the strength of that menswear show was, when he did all those frilled looks in different colours. And to me this is kind of mirroring that. You know, you've got those sequins and in 3 different colours coming out. Do you think that's part of his success? To me this is a very digital friendly show, because you see those and you'll see them next to each other and it'll have an amazing visual impact. You can imagine kids putting that on Tumblr, you know, lined up against each other. It's a different kind of theatrics, but it's theatrics for people who weren't just at the show, perhaps.
Although I think maybe these are possibly, I mean, that's for me possibly one of the least identifiable looks, I think.
It's a pity with these images, because if you see that from the side, that top is actually cut. And you can see, I saw a picture of it on Instagram before we went live, and it's kind of comes down and you can see through, so it's really, it kind of ties around her waist. So really beautiful.
So that then relates to his menswear collection,
Exactly.
when he was doing the false shirt fronts.
Sorry, we can keep going now, I just wanted to look at those looks.
But we were also talking just before we went on air about the impact of Instagram on people's fashion collections, and this awareness that a lot of people are just going to be seeing the collection that big and having to do these things. And what's quite interesting is that he manages to make it work as a very small image. It's quite an iconic silhouette.
Yeah.
But then when you look closely, he has got those amazing details that kind of distinguish it as high fashion.
I think you can't ignore that. Like David Como, I interviewed him and he talks about how he designs with a digital eye. And I think it's interesting to think that actually probably all of this generation of designers they're going to think about how it looks online. That's going to be maybe as much of their focus as it is. And I question sometimes though whether that's going to have a bad effect on fashion, because Instagram, it's very small. You don't see the cut as well. And if you think of the rise of kind of the statement sweater that people are buying so well, sometimes I wonder whether that's from Instagram. People are less concerned about
do you know
cut and fit.
You know what it's like? It's like when you hear a great song and you hear it on a car radio and it's really tinny, but you can still tell it's a great song. And then you go and you like put headphones on and you hear the whole experience. It works in both ways, but when it's really great, it covers all mediums.
Is it dangerous to have designers designing just for digital though?
I think it's quite sad.
Yeah.
I mean, the point of kind of having, the difference between buying kind of expensive high fashion pieces and pieces from the high street was always to do with the quality of the workmanship and this independent eye, and the fact that quite often, people would put details in there that only the wearer would know about, or you'd notice there's some amazing bit of craftsmanship, and if that suddenly loses its kind of worth, its value, then
I suppose it depends what you do with it digitally. I mean, I'm thinking about when Gareth Pugh did the film with Ruth Hogben, and that whole film, I mean, it's a different thing because it wasn't just an Instagram image, obviously it was an entire film, and the music was perfect with it. It was incredible because it was all designed to show the textiles and the flow and the movement and how these things were, rather than as a static, here are a couple of angles of it. But obviously you can't do that very often.
But we agree that J.W. Anderson holds up in both ways. It holds up as a kind of designer for the Instagram generation, but also for when you actually feel and see those clothes. Yeah. So I think we're getting towards the end of the show, so I'm interested. I really agree with something you said, Soki, about how there seems to be lots of different shows at work here. It does
sort of feel like I've been trying to work on a collection as well, so when you take your inspiration from different collections, you're quite self-critical of, obviously you want your ideas to come straight from your brain, but I feel like he's either very relaxed with the fact that he knows he's good at what he does and he's happy to take those references, and when I'm looking through the images, I do see quite a lot of similarities between a lot of other designers, but it's each their own. But he's still got his own stamp on each individual look, but I still don't see any flow.
Do you think there's not quite enough flow in this, Belle? Would you agree? Do you think this could have done with some editing? Can you see a cohesive statement running through this?
Oh, I do think it's kind of gone here and there, but I also know that J.W. Anderson tends to consider the order of the shows very, very carefully. So there may be a reason to this that we don't know about. I'm actually starting to think that his women's wear is slightly more successful than his men's wear in terms of just appeal.
You say appeal, and I think I was going to ask you, Katie, this obviously working as a fashion journalist, can you see the appeal of this to women? Can you imagine why girls are going to want this collection in particular?
Yeah, some of it more than others, and I think some of them really sort of nonchalant, sort of slouchy jumpers with a kind of cut. I can really see that working because it's almost a more sophisticated version of the sort of grunge aesthetic in a way. So I think for a younger generation, yeah, definitely. I think there's, and then as we were saying before, and they move on up, they get more sculptural. I think some stuff's going to be quite difficult to buy into.
Yeah,
in all honesty, but I think there's pieces. Yeah, I mean,
I wouldn't wear that.
No,
ever. It's not flattering.
No.
Well, he does
on a model. However,
maybe
it's nice
50-50. Maybe it's 50-50 with this collection.
Yeah.
We've seen the whole collection now, so we seem to have undenied. Is this a strong collection? Are we happy to have seen this? Do we think that this is a right step for Jonathan Anderson? Are we giving this a thumbs up, or are we giving pieces a thumbs up?
I don't think it's the strongest, but he's obviously going in a different direction. I can see that. I don't think it's the strongest thing.
I'm not sure that summer is his strongest overall. I think he's maybe slightly better when he's a bit darker.
Maybe that ties to what he says about he starts a new idea in spring, summer, and maybe by autumn, winter he's perfected it a little bit. Belle, what do you think?
I think I've enjoyed other women's wear collections of his more than this one. I'm slightly not being able to see some of the whiter ones on the screens, but maybe 2 or 3 seasons ago I really loved it. This one.
But we're intrigued by this new direction.
Yeah.
Cool. I'm conscious of time, so should we go to questions from the audience? Because we'd love to hear your thoughts as well. Please be brave. Does anyone have a question? Oh no.
Not one person?
Come on, guys.
What about you there in the corner in the acne jacket? you wear that dress?
No, but I don't particularly like wearing flesh colours. I am obviously more of a black, dark muted colours person. So maybe if it was in black.
Maybe if it was in black.
Yeah, maybe if it's in black. I bet you I'm going to end up loving that in 2 weeks and go and buy it.
Maybe for another panel, Brix.
Maybe.
That would be good.
Yeah, it's a personal order for Brix.
We could have like a whole J.W. Anderson panel next time.
Yeah.
All coordinated.
Yeah.
Are there any more questions from the audience?
Oh, you.
Yay, a question over this way.
Hi. Yeah, when you look at the pictures in this collection, I mean, I think we've been seeing things that look on the surface really structural, and then things sort of like this that look a bit flappy. But there are, in a way, structural elements, like kind of the column line and the ruching, and the same with that Babydoll and the bands. Do you see this collection as having like really two sort of distinct themes and lines, or do you see this being actually integrated into one? Like, how do you look at that?
Did everyone hear that question?
Yeah.
Yeah? This kind of ties to what we were saying, I think, about this, whether there are lots of different statements going on. What do you think of that, Bel? Do you see this as being one statement?
Actually, I was really hoping you won't, because I don't actually have a response to that.
Okay, sorry. Who has a response?
I do. At the moment, because it's all new and we're just seeing it now, and I really haven't had time to digest it completely, I'm seeing it as three different complete things. I don't know how it works together. I'll have to think about it. But, you know, three things going on for me.
A couple of things that I noticed we haven't really talked about is androgyny. So we're not even really considering that in this conversation. I don't think there's a unisex discussion here at all. And also challenging boundaries of female beauty. I think that's a step too far for me, or it's a little bit too early, because I think that's challenging me too much. You know, I don't mind sort of oval skirts or armour-like bodices, but I don't want her to have that kind of sag right now.
I'm
Maybe
glad
later.
you mentioned androgyny, actually, because that's one thing, as you say, we didn't talk about that much. What does this say about, this didn't feel expected to me because it didn't feel as androgynous as usual. You know, we talked about it being girly at the start, but what does this seem like a move away from that androgyny to you guys?
He was actually using he was bringing some volumatic kind of draping in his last menswear collection. So he had these huge Oxford bags with these very decorative front pieces. And so you can kind of see this as an evolution in a way of that. And you know, lots of voluminous cloth isn't necessarily female. If you think of those kind of 18th century men's shirts that were enormously gathered in at certain points. So you can imagine that he would kind of take this into menswear. I mean, for me,
You did the halter tops as well, which kind of, you know, with that voluminous kind of tucked over fabric.
For me, this has all been really an exercise in creating kind of draped volume, which is something he's really not done that much before. So I think there are, you know, working with different ways of controlling volumes of fabric as well, whether that's pleating or doing some kind of origami or weaving or ruching, as in this particularly unfortunate. But one thing I was actually going to say earlier is he doesn't do bosoms, and you can really see that from that photograph. He doesn't quite know what to do with this area.
Yeah, we all feel a bit uncomfortable about this particular shot, I think.
Maybe we want to get this video. Can we get a different
Can I
shot?
just say, on a plus point of this shot, it is cocoon-like, which is totally asexual, because what's going to come out of the cocoon? It's kind of neutral. That's all.
So if we were answering your question as a collective, perhaps we'd say that there's a step. This collection is a step in a certain direction, which perhaps is quite focused, but within the collection there's quite a few
It was
different
either a
things going
growth or a taste to himself, I think. It's either one of them.
I agree,
Do we have any further questions for our fabulous panellists?
More of a general question, but actually could each of the speakers and the host as well explain how you actually judge a collection?
That's a really tough question.
It's your own personal.
It's really instinctive, and it's almost where you are at a particular time in your sort of visual language, what appeals to you, what doesn't. It's really personal. It's when you get a consensus of people liking something that you start to go, right, that's popular, or that's good, or that's forward, that's the direction we'll be moving in. But it is very instinctive.
For me, I think it's definitely instinctual. You're always going to have a personal reaction to a show, but I think you're also, I'm always thinking about the bigger picture about who else will buy this and what that says about what women want to look like and whether this person's kind of on the money in terms of how women may want to look. I mean, you know, sometimes you look at especially a male designer and you just think that there's no understanding there at all. So yeah, it's kind of, you know, whether I personally like it, whether I think it would sell, how it fits into their bigger context, this historic context of that designer.
One thing I've noticed, sorry, well, do you want to go now?
Well, just there are also different levels as you look at something. So, there's the would I wear this kind of level, or does this appeal to me on a conceptual level? So there are lots of different ways to see it.
That's actually really similar to what I was going to say. One thing I've noticed from doing the panels is because we talk a lot more about each show, it's made me much more aware of moods, and we'll talk a lot about why something fits in how we feel about now, or what's going on in fashion exhibitions, or what's going on in the way people are dressing on the street. And having a lengthy discussion about fashion has made me judge collections slightly differently. I think it's probably made it a bit less instinctive for me, because I tend to, we've talked about this collection now for an hour, so it does make you try and sort of position everything. It's like you have a big map in front of you and you're trying to sort of work out how everything fits.
I think, there's also that thing about fashion in general, isn't it, that you can't help, if you look at a lot of shows, being really, you're kind of always waiting for, we're desperately hoping that every time you see a new show that it's going to be something where you feel like, oh my god, so that's really moved fashion on.
Yeah.
You want that to be the show that isn't just like, yeah, it's another nice show and it's going to sell pretty well. You want to see something different, because effectively you're looking at applied art in a lot of ways, and you want to see something extraordinary. I mean, that's why, we all used to get super excited about the McQueen shows, because you really felt like you were going to see something that was going to turn a corner and change your perception of what fashion could be. And that was really thrilling and really exciting. So that's, the bigger thing, I think.
Are there any more questions from the audience? Yeah?
Do you think JW will design for Topshop again, and what kind of impact can that have on the brand? Just so people like me can kind of get their hands on some of the collection.
That's quite a good question, actually, to talk a little bit about, high street collaborations. Do you think it's brilliant to see young designers being able to do stuff like that?
Yeah.
Would you like to see another Topshop range, all of you?
I think it's unlikely that he's going to do it. I mean, he was quite brave. He only did 2, I think.
Yeah, he did 2, yeah.
And I thought that was quite brave to just stop it there. I'd be surprised if he went back. Could be wrong, but
I see a lot of inspiration from emerging like fashionista designers in this collection, and I sort of feel like it'd be silly not to. I think that's what kind of keeps in the loop at the moment, because I'll be honest, his previous collections before, I've always found there was a bold statement to make. There's always something there, and this one I just sort of feel like he's just taking bits from other designers.
There's also, and I think there's also something really smart about doing those collections as well, because if you think about it, there's only a certain amount of people that can actually afford to buy high fashion, let's face it. And actually, if you're doing stuff for a brand like Topshop, and Topshop is because it is such a credible brand, but obviously a high street brand, that's where you can kind of groom your, it's a really horrible term, but sort of groom your future consumers, really.
Yeah, totally.
But those are the people that actually, like we said before, you've got that sort of escalating scale, and those are the people that are going to be buying maybe the really wild stuff later on. So it's not just about literally flogging more stuff, it's about actually cultivating your audience.
Yeah, you said he was trained as an actor, and I think he's playing to the world stage.
That's a very good quote for it. I'm conscious of time, so because this is our first panel of London Fashion Week, I would like to end on an optimistic note of what we're excited for the rest of London Fashion Week. What's everyone looking forward to? Hettie, do you want to go first? We'll go along this way.
Well, I was really looking forward to Giles tomorrow night. And Thomas Tate the next day as well, who I think is really emerging as somebody very interesting and exciting.
Bel, who are your stars other than Jonathan?
I love Roxander. I've been to a couple of shows I've really enjoyed as Fyodor Golan. It's a young partnership. I liked Sibling because it made me so happy. Sister by Sibling. Yeah, a lot going on.
How about you, Soki?
A Fashionista is always my favourite.
Fashionista?
Yes.
How about you, Katie?
Giles for me, because that's one of the places I feel like I might get the unexpected thrill, I think.
The unexpected.
Hopefully.
How about you, Brix? What are you looking forward to?
Definitely Roxander. Also, I really love Erdem. I really do, personally. And definitely Fashionista, on which I am on the panel. So help bring those guys along for a few seasons. So I'm looking to see, can't wait to see it.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much to our wonderful panelists, and thank you for listening, and thank you for your brilliant questions. We're off air.